The Biden administration declared monkeypox a public health emergency, with cases continuing to surge across the U.S.
As you all know, the monkeypox outbreak has evolved rapidly and uniquely from prior outbreaks. So we are in it's a different dynamic than it was the last couple times, because monkeypox has been here in this country before. And so we have aggressively responded at different stages of this outbreak.
Since the first monkeypox case was identified in Boston this May, the U.S. has confirmed more than 6,600 cases in 48 states, Washington, D.C., and Puerto Rico. And to break this down for us and to get a closer look at the Chinese Communist Party's true intentions, we're happy to bring on the co-chair of the Congressional Taiwan Caucus, Congressman Steve Chabot. Congressman Chabot, thank you so much for joining us today.
Happy to be with you.
So, having sat on the Taiwan caucus for so many years, does the U.S. have a strong and clear strategic response to this sort of conflict between mainland China and Taiwan?
Well, I do wish that the administration had been a bit more united. You had the speaker and you had the president saying two different things about this trip. Irregardless, the fact is that it's the PRC, the Chinese Communist Party specifically, who has been wrong here and has been provocative, not Nancy Pelosi, not the president, and not Taiwan. And I think it's been a gross overreaction by President Xi to have his naval ships as well as planes incursions into Taiwan's airspace, cyber attacks, which occurred against Taiwan. These are what we call gray zone tactics, which are kind of the space between war and peace. They can be very dangerous, however, if miscalculations are made. And that's one reason that I think one thing we do need to change is something called strategic ambiguity, which is our policy right now. Ambiguity meaning that we keep China off balance a bit by they don't know if we would actually be there militarily or not with Taiwan if they acted. I prefer strategic clarity, where we make absolutely clear that the United States and our allies would stand with Taiwan if they did act militarily.
Now, speaking of showing unity and togetherness, this is clearly an issue that has brought both parties together here in Washington, D.C., Democrats and Republicans. We saw a number of Republicans supporting Speaker Pelosi's trip to Taiwan. It's also uniting countries across the Western Hemisphere. So I want to ask, Congressman, what do you think is the global consequences for China if they choose to continue escalating militarily or if they even choose to invade?
Well, in some ways, the PRC, China is acting like a rogue nation here. They're not acting like a responsible world leader. Theirs has been unprovoked activities which are damaging to the peace. These live fire missile drills, as well as other types of weapons. And some of that has been directed towards Japan, for example. That's just completely inappropriate. Well, each country has to make that decision on their own, and none of us want war. None of us want to have military hostilities. Peace is what we all ought to be looking for here. The United States, of course, has strong relations with a number of countries. In the Indo-Pacific, for example, there's something called the Quad, which is the United States, India, Australia, and Japan. And we've been working together very closely for a number of years now, and we have a lot of other allies in the region. The one thing that China has been successful in doing is uniting much of the rest of the world, especially those countries in their region, to be united against what China is doing.
And speaking of Xi miscalculating, Xi Jinping, the Chinese Communist Party leader, miscalculating here and actually leading to much of the Western Hemisphere uniting on this issue. Some would say that since so many of the countries have united in condemning China's actions here, the Chinese Communist Party is actually isolating themselves. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think they are isolating themselves. I think their reaction here has been completely disproportionate to what they object to. They object to an American member of Congress going to Taiwan. Many of us do that, and there are many times the speaker has done that. It's a long tradition. She has every right to go there.
What is their purpose of escalating these tensions and flexing their military muscles towards Taiwan's now? What do you think the Chinese Communist Party's true intentions are here?
Well, I think long term, they want to be the premier power across the globe, not just in the Indo-Pacific region, which is what I think they want now, but ultimately they want to be the most powerful nation in the world. They want to replace the United States. And essentially, you would have a country who stands for freedom and opportunity, replaced by an authoritarian government who basically wants to suppress freedom, not only within its own country, but throughout the world. So we can't let that happen. Ultimately, I don't think they're going to be successful in that, but we need to stand together to make sure that that doesn't happen.
All right. Thank you so much, Congressman Steve Chabot.
Thank you very much.
And following the deadly car crash that took the lives of Indiana Congresswoman Jackie Walorski and 2 of her staffers, President Biden offers his condolences, expressing that he and the First Lady Jill Biden are shocked and saddened by the tragic incident. The president's statement went on to say, quote, "We send our deepest condolences to the Walorski's husband and the families of her staff members, Zachary Potts and Emma Thompson, who lost their lives in public service, and to the people of Indiana's 2nd District who lost a representative who was one of their own." Biden says that while he and Walorski represented different political parties and disagreed on many issues, Walorski was respected by members of both parties for her work. New information from an Indiana Sheriff's Department reveals that the vehicle carrying the Congresswoman apparently crossed the center line and collided with oncoming traffic. Indiana Senator Todd Young says he is hurting over the loss of his colleague and friend, Congresswoman Jackie Walorski.
She was a very close friend. She was someone who was incredibly smart, great sense of humor, and she could light up a room. She really could, with her personality, with her magnetism, and she wore her values and her conviction on her sleeve.
President Biden ordered all United States flags to be flown at half-staff through August 4th to remember the life of Congresswoman Walorski. Governor Ron DeSantis has moved to suspend Florida State Attorney Andrew Warren. According to the governor's office, this is for neglecting duty and a blanket refusal to enforce Florida's criminal laws. DeSantis says that Warren was refusing to enforce state laws prohibiting child sex changes and restricting abortion.
And to make sure that that was not going to happen here, where you would have individual prosecutors nullify laws that were enacted by the people's representatives. And I can tell you it's been a very, very troubling record. So the prosecutor, state attorney for this judicial circuit, Andrew Warren, has put himself publicly above the law.
Warren, a Democrat, has been an outspoken critic of DeSantis. DeSantis said that he noticed Los Angeles and San Francisco prosecutors selectively enforcing crimes. He then had his staff speak with local law enforcement to make sure that this was not going to happen in Florida. Prosecutor Andrew Warren was reported to have a record of picking and choosing which laws to enforce. That's according to the Florida governor. This week, 60% of voters showed up at the polls in Kansas in favor of keeping abortion access legal. To take a closer look at what these results reveal about our cultural norms, Christina Bennett with Live Action News joins us. All right, Christina, so I first want to talk with you about Kansas. So the outcome was pretty shocking for many people. It shows that even if some didn't show up to the polls intent on blocking abortion restrictions, there still wasn't enough people who took it as a priority to vote to allow the law to protect life. So I think this kind of shows that our society has become numb to what abortion actually is. That being said, do you think that this decades-long trend of legalizing abortion has led to our society to become numb of what the grim reality of abortion is?
I definitely do think that people are numb and they're just not aware. And that's one of the reasons why through Live Action, we did this whole campaign called What is Abortion? Educating people as to the reality of what abortion is. I'm so thankful for the tens of thousands more people in Kansas who are pro-life who came out and voted yes on the value them both legislation. But unfortunately, there was so much misinformation regarding that legislation. And I think many people in Kansas were scared. And so it didn't go the way that we thought. But there are still people in Kansas who fight for life, care about the lives of the preborn, and they're going to continue fighting for their state.
Now, I want to talk about your personal involvement here on the pro-life activism that you've been doing. So I saw a clip when you testified to Congress on this issue, and you said something very interesting. You said that you see abortion as a genocide against Black women. Could you please help our audience understand why you have this understanding?
Yes, it's actually very interesting because a lot of people don't know that one of the first people to actually call abortion an act of Black genocide was the Reverend Jesse Jackson, because in the 70s, in the early 80s, the Reverend Jesse Jackson was outspoken against abortion. But tragically, he ran for president as a Democrat, and then he changed his tune and he became pro-choice, and he's been pro-choice ever since. But the reason that he and many others refer to abortion as a form of Black genocide is because the abortion industry, since its inception, has targeted communities of color, specifically the Black community. As far back as Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood, she had a Negro project where she hired Black ministers to promote birth control. And she considered Black people to be like weeds that she wanted to pull up out of the ground. She considered them to be unfit and didn't want them reproducing after their own kind, quote unquote. So the very early beginnings of Planned Parenthood were rooted in racism, eugenics, and population control, and we still see that today.
Wow, I think that's a very interesting historical fact that not many, especially people from the younger generation, don't quite understand. I mean, you being a Black woman, being pro-life, and knowing these historical facts, how has that made an impression on you after you came to understand the root of abortion and how it's been popularized in our society?
It opened my eyes in a way that I could never go back to ignorant. I grew up in the state of Connecticut, which is where I still reside. Very pro-abortion state, never heard abortion talked about at home, only heard about it talked about in school in a positive sense as a woman's right. I knew nothing about the history of Planned Parenthood. I knew nothing about the high abortion rate in the Black community or how we've been targeted. And when I began to research and I learned these things, it opened my eyes, and I realized this is an industry that is preying off of my people, and they are really targeting them for money and for gain, and they are causing an immense amount of suffering and devastation to our community while they're building their business. And so it was shocking for me. I watched the movie Ma'afa 21, which highlights in great detail the history of Planned Parenthood and the abortion industry and how they've targeted the Black community. And when I saw that, I knew that I had to continue to speak up to save lives.
Now, Christina, I want to ask you what led you down that path to searching for this truth?
Well, that's a great question. Everything changed for me in college. I was going to school. I wasn't exactly sure what I was going to do with my life, but I ended up finding out that I was once scheduled to be aborted, that in 1980s at Mount Sinai Hospital in Hartford, Connecticut, my mother went alone. She was pressured by my father. He coerced her into getting an abortion, and she was rejected by a church mentor. When she told her church mentor she was pregnant, the woman said, "Don't come back to this church." And she went to get an abortion, but moments before the procedure, a janitor saw her in the hospital. The janitor saw her crying and told her that God would give her the strength to have me. And by God's grace, she was able to tell the abortion doctor that she was leaving. Now, he got mad because he told her, "Don't leave. You've already paid for this." He didn't want to lose business. But she ran out of his office and she kept me. She also kept it a secret for over 20 years. But when I discovered that I was scheduled to die, that I was moments away from being dismembered and discarded as a piece of medical waste, when I learned that truth, I knew that my life was saved, and I knew that I had to fight to save others.
Wow, very beautiful story, and I'm so glad that you have the courage to share it with other people to help them understand the truth of this. Thank you for your time, Christina.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
United Launch Alliance's 5th mission of the year lifted off from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida. An Atlas V rocket carrying a missile warning satellite for the U.S. Space Force lifted off Thursday morning. The satellite and rocket safely separated. ULA has launched 152 times with 100% mission success.